This is just the beginning.
Welcome to our second Axios live stream, coming at you live in quarantine from my own house. Hopefully most of you, or all of you, are in quarantine, being safe, being healthy. This live stream will be focused very much on leading in crisis. Thank you to Anheuser-Busch for making this possible as the sponsor. We're going to talk about how do you lead in this moment where we need extraordinary leadership. We're going to hear from Mark Cuban. Hopefully we'll hear from the governor of Michigan, who is in the middle of making news herself today in terms of stay-at-home orders for her state. And then Richard Edelman, who's an expert in how people look to leaders to lead in moments like this. Thank you for following us on Facebook, on Twitter, YouTube, and Axios.com, and follow us at hashtag Axios Events. First up, Mark Cuban, owner of the Dallas Mavericks, billionaire, entrepreneur, and one of the co-creators of Shark Tank. Mark, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You said on Twitter this morning, quote, when things are all messed up beyond recognition, that's when the heroes step forward and create things, invent things, and develop things that change the world. That's what we need now. If you have a vision for America 2.0, now's the time. How has your vision of America changed? How will we be different after this crisis?
It's hard to say. I don't have a specific vision, honestly. That's why I was asking for them. I wanted to hear more. Obviously we will be changed. We'll be a lot more reticent just to go outside. We'll be a lot more conservative, and the people we're around will be very hesitant on where we go. Public spaces we're going to be, concerned about. And even in the office, I mean, that first time we go back to the office and we walk into the big conference room to have a meeting, everybody's going to be hesitant when they walk into the front door. So I think the first step in America 2.0 is being able to find companies that can give people confidence that where we go is safe. And once we get there and we feel a little bit more confident, then we can start getting things back to normal. But I think bigger picture, when we look back in 5 or 10 years, there's going to be however many companies, 5, 10, 15, 20 companies that were created during the pandemic of 2020, specifically because we had this reset, specifically because it's a unique opportunity. And I'm looking for those companies, and I want to help them go. And hopefully they're out there getting started right now.
You have a big public platform as an owner of a professional basketball franchise, but you're also on TV. I see you do lots of interviews. Tell me about how you're leading in this moment. Tell me what you've done for the employees, not just of the basketball team, but all the people who work at these arenas. A lot of these people don't make a ton of money. A lot of these people don't have necessarily huge houses or awesome health care to depend on. What are you doing to take care of your people?
I'm paying them. I'm paying them as if nothing changed. I mean, I'm blessed. I don't have to worry about my next dollar. But there are a lot of people who have to worry about every dollar. If they lose their jobs, they'll have to worry about how they pay for their meals, how they pay for their children. What happens next? Can they pay their rent? And it just seemed like the right thing for me to do. Whether it's the American Airlines Center, the people that work the Mavs games, paying them as if we continue to play all our games. Whether it's a restaurant that I own and continuing to pay the bartenders, the waiters, the barbacks as if it was business as usual. I mean, I'm not trying to tell everybody how to spend their money, but I just felt like it was the right thing to do.
How long can you do that? Like you've guaranteed that you would pay their health care, their wages for how long? And how long do you think you could continue to do that if this whole virus crisis goes longer than we anticipate?
I mean, it's not cheap, but it's something I can afford. I mean, I don't know how long. I mean, I'll do it as long as is needed. It's not something where I put a cap on it. Well, when I get to this number of millions or 10 million or 20, whatever it is, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I'll do it as long as I need to.
You're a blunt guy. Like when you look around and you see other billionaires, other franchise owners, other business owners, are you happy, like in terms of how much you see coming from other leaders? Do you think that there's certain segments of leadership, certain segments of CEOs that just aren't doing enough, that aren't matching what you're doing?
I mean, look at Bank of America, 208,000 employees, and Brian Moynihan has come out and said very specifically he's going to continue to pay them as if it's business as usual. That's being a leader. That's stepping up, and I've heard it from others. I talked to casinos, Las Vegas Sands. They're paying everybody tips and everything as if it was business as usual. I don't. There's not. There are multiple companies that are doing this. And you don't like to speak negatively of companies, but look at 3M. The president just invoked the World Powers Act on them for a very good reason. If you just look at their public statements, it's great that they're increasing their production from, or doubling their production to 2 billion masks a year. But when you look at what they're doing here in the United States for the country they're based in, the country they're founded, they produce according to their own numbers, 110 million masks a month globally, 35 million masks a month domestically. Where's the difference going? We have a shortage. We all know people who are on the front line as healthcare providers that we're terrified for every day when they go to work. We all know people who are sick that we're terrified for every single day. Yet there's a PPE shortage, particularly of masks, and there's 65 million masks that they're saying nothing about. When you have a company like that, maybe they can't solve the problem. Maybe they don't have enough production to deal with all the demand because it's gone up 17 times. I get that. But you can't ghost the American people. You have to be forthright as a leader. You have to be transparent. You have to be honest. You have to communicate. And I think 3M was arrogant and decided just to not to speak. And I think it worked in their disadvantage. And now they find themselves under the War Powers Act. And who knows what's going to happen from there.
How much do you worry? Like right now, the focus is on health, right? It's trying to get people to stay home, stay quarantined, stay healthy, keep a safe social distance so that you can slow the spread of the virus. You talk to a lot of CEOs like we do, a lot of concern out there that if May becomes April, meaning if we're still sitting at home all of May like we are in April, that there could be catastrophic consequences for companies, especially small businesses that might not have massive margins and that might not have deep enough pockets to be able to pay people when there's not a robust business around them. How worried, when you talk to your friends, especially at the C-suite level, how worried are they that the economic catastrophe could be worse than we anticipate?
Everybody's terrified. I mean, there's no way to sugarcoat it. Everybody's completely afraid. And I think the great experiment is going to be in fiscal policy. The government, I think, did the right thing with the Paycheck Protection Plan, $500 billion for medium to larger size companies that don't qualify for the 500 employee and under program. I think that was smart, but $2 trillion is not going to be enough. And so the great experiment is how much in debt can we go? And when the options are putting people's lives at risk, we're testing new monetary theory to see just, how far. Is it 6 trillion? Is it 12 trillion? Is it 20 trillion that we can go in debt? I think we're going to find out that we're going to test the monetary theory to see just how much money we can print and how much we can go in debt in order to solve this problem. That's complete uncertainty. But the reality is, as leaders, as business people, when you deal with imperfect information, you make imperfect decisions. But you can't try to make the ultimate perfect decision. We've all heard the saying, perfection is the enemy of the good. And that's what we're facing right now. So, when we talk, everybody becomes an amateur economist, but I think that's where the real risk or the real experiment's going to come from. I think we may find ourselves paying for a lot of people's payrolls for a long time to come, and then we'll deal with the consequences when we get there. Is that the right way? I don't know, but that's one of those things we'll find out.
Do you share the concern that some CEOs have that there's not enough emphasis on the importance of getting sort of the economy right, even if it means in sort of the crudest terms that there's going to be, like people might have to lose their lives because people are going back to work to try to get the economy up and running? I hear from a lot of CEOs who say this, but they would never say it in public because it sounds so crude and so cold. But there is deep concern. Like, how much are you hearing that?
A lot. I mean, a lot of people are concerned, but there's no way on God's green earth I'm going to say to any of my employees, go out there, pretend nothing happened. No way. Unless it's safe. I mean, as safe as we can possibly predict it will be, I'm saying no. I'll tell my employees, I'm going to pay you not to go out there. And if you go out there, you'll lose your job. My job as a CEO, as a leader, is not to make sure the economy is as good as it could be given the circumstances. My job is to keep my employees safe, to make sure that their families are safe, to make sure that, they can adapt and deal with these new circumstances. Because as I said earlier, this is complete uncertainty, and we're all guessing. If we send people out, the scientists say, well, maybe the virus will reemerge and it'll make things worse. No one knows. And, when nobody knows, I'll err on the side of safety every single time.
And NBA, obviously you're intimately involved in it. Will there be a season? Will there be a champion this year?
I hope so. I really do. But again, the NBA will put safety first. There's no way we're going to put our players, employees, staff, or fans for that matter at risk. But if the scientists tell us that there's a way that we can get this done and play with no fans or play just for the TV cameras, Adam Silver, our commissioner, I'm sure will work through it and find a way. But I don't have a prediction. But I'm hopeful. Let's put it that way.
The Atlanta Hawks CEO suggested maybe pushing the season by 2 months, which I think would move the championship into August. Is that reasonable?
Oh, yeah. I've been asking for that for years. And, the only reason we haven't done it already is because the households using television during the summer had historically been much lower than in the spring. But now everything's different, not just because of the virus, but because of, over-the-top streaming and because of cutting the cord. So we've got to completely, effectively for all businesses, not just the NBA, this is a complete reset. All these things you were wondering about, boy, if we only tried this, if we only tried that, I wonder what would happen. Now you get a chance to try them. So we get a chance to experiment. And that's exactly what we should do. And that's exactly what every business should do. We're this reset, we have a chance to go into America 2.0. Every single company has those scenarios where, boy, if I only had time, I would redo this material, I'd redo this product, I'd reevaluate, this process, I'd reset my supply chain. This is a chance to make your company stronger so that when we come out on the other side, you're a much better organization.
For those watching, please hit us at hashtag Axios events if you have questions. One sort of, lighter question and pretty heavy times. We have a question from Denny in Woodbridge, Virginia, who seems to be a pretty big fan of yours, who wonders if you would ever consider getting into the presidential race, given that it does seem like it's going to be a different era, different time, needs different ideas. You've flirted with it in the past. I assume you wouldn't do it now?
I doubt it, but like I said, everything's a reset right now. And so you never say never. I mean, if this would have been a month ago, I would have said absolutely not. But obviously things are crazy. Things are changing. So I'll keep an open mind, but I seriously doubt it.
You've looked at this before. I know you've put some thought into it. It's probably too late, though, right? Whether you wanted to or somebody else wanted to jump in to be able to get ballot access, to be able to be a viable candidate, that's not actually plausible, is it?
Oh, it's plausible. It's definitely doable. It's just the question, should you do it? That's what I don't know.
And if you didn't do it and you look around and you look at the new environment, you look at America 2.0, who else should do it? Who else should think about doing it for the good of the country?
I don't know. I mean, it's not something I've evaluated, not something I've talked to other potential candidates about. I don't have an answer for you.
Mark, I appreciate your time. Thank you for the work that you're doing to keep your workers paid and on healthcare, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks for having me.
To those watching at home, we're going to thank you, Mark. We're going to have a brief video here from Anheuser-Busch, your sponsor. Then we'll return with Richard Edelman, who has fresh polling data on what you're thinking about leadership in crisis.
This buds for the Blues, the Reds, and the Warriors. This buds for the Giants, the Jazz, and the Magic. This buds for the home team.
We're back, and we're here with Richard Edelman, who I've known for a long time. He's a real student of leadership, a student of public opinion. Richard, you've been in the field. You've been studying for a long time through what you call your trust barometer, leading in crisis. Help us make sense of this moment. What do we want based on the data that you see?
So at the moment, we actually have quite low trust in government and media. And business is the most trusted institution. And that puts special responsibility on business to be a source of information and to act in this crisis, not to just wait, but to move and not wait for permission. It's also vital that business be willing to work with other institutions, NGOs to deliver services, government to create a framework for dealing, as I am in New York City, with a huge number of people going into hospital.
In your data, I think it was 71% of people said that any company, any brand that puts profits before doing the right thing in this era, that those people will never, ever trust that company or brand again. It makes companies sort of timid, right? They don't know how to navigate a moment like this, whether to speak out forcefully or whether to just try to run their company and get into survival mode. What would you recommend?
Companies have to speak up now, Jim, because they are actually the most trusted sources of information, more than government and more than media. Also, brands are expected not to do a blackout, but they're expected to say how they're helping solve the problem and also what they're doing to help employees specifically keep their jobs. That's actually become the most important issue in the last week. It was protect your employees first, and now in terms of safety, and now protect your employees in terms of their income.
So you're saying that in your data, that the public, the people watching this, they trust a CEO for news and information more than they would trust the government or media?
Basically, they want to get the information from scientists, from technical experts, but they expect to be updated every day on the company website. And it's profound that the website is more believed than, in fact, mainstream media. Mainstream media is being relied upon in terms of quantity, but in terms of factual credibility, it's the company. And therefore, it's trust moving to local. It used to be from the top down. Now we want to get it from sources near us. And the company has a special privileged place now.
I think the last time you and I had lunch, Richard, we talked about sort of this global phenomenon where people have just lost faith in almost every institution. Why?
Because they see failures on the part of institutions, failures to move, failures to help people, selfishness, and too much partisan infighting. You know, it's stunning to me that Republicans find media to be the least trusted institution, while Democrats find it the most trusted institution. For Democrats, business is the least trusted institution, and it's the most trusted institution for Republicans. So we have like Alice in Wonderland. What we need to find is a way forward here that allows there to be facts put into the bloodstream. That media has to be seen as adding to the overall quality of the news flow, and that if we can get to factual, if we can get to quality information, we can make good decisions. Without that, we are really in trouble. We're just wandering back and forth.
I don't know if you heard my interview with Mark Cuban, but Mark Cuban was very critical of 3M for not stepping up and doing more to direct their production of things that healthcare workers need in real time to the United States versus some of their global markets. If you look at a case like 3M and they might be a client, if they're a client or not, but what would you advise them? Like, how do you handle a situation like that where suddenly the spotlight's on you negatively in real time on a topic that every single American cares about?
So companies have a special responsibility to be fair in allocating precious resource. And 3M's a global company, and they're doing their best to make sure that the masks get equally distributed. But there are companies that are really acting responsibly now. HP has sent 3D printers to hospitals so they can make medical masks. Microsoft has created a bot such that if you can't get through to your doctor, you can determine whether or not you actually should go to hospital based on coronavirus symptoms. And there are many others that are protecting jobs. For example, Starbucks is paying people through June. Hilton, which had to do a massive layoff, is making sure that its employees have the access to go over to work for people such as Walmart, Amazon, and others. The furloughed people are going to have another opportunity to make money. That's being smart. And it's also smart if big business is making its supply chains reach into small business and try and keep as many people employed as possible.
I'd be curious for your take on, in terms of leadership in crisis, assessing President Trump. Like he's now on pretty much every day at around 5 o'clock, often for 2 hours, talking about this crisis in pretty great detail. Early on, downplayed it, probably undoubtedly to pretty catastrophic consequences for some, because the government reacted relatively slow. Seems like the last week really picking up the pace, both in his own communications, but also in the realization of the severity of the problem. What's he getting most right? What's he getting most wrong about communicating in this crisis?
So he's getting right the idea of frequency. He's surrounding himself with experts such as Dr. Fauci. He's also bringing live stories in. He's making heroes out of the frontline healthcare workers. Look, I understand the president. 3 weeks ago, I went to a basketball game in Madison Square Garden for the Big East tournament, because I always do. I sort of thought myself, okay, if I will this enough, we can fight this. No, I've now learned that that's wrong. We have to listen to the medical authorities. We have to overdo being precautionary. And I've been inside for the last 19 days because that is leadership at the moment. We have to obey and, in a way, lead from the front this way. And so the president is right in having corrected his mistake of a comeback by Easter. He has to give facts, and he has to continue to listen to his medical authorities.
Advise me. Like, I run a media company. You just said that that public trust, especially among Republicans of the media, is sadly extremely low. What can we do different? Like, what are the steps that us as a media company can do to reassure and rebuild that trust with the American public?
I think people just want to try to have facts, Jim, and try to avoid political infighting and he said, she said, and Trump and Schumer arguing over small points and calling each other doing to actually improve our employment possibilities, making sure that we're safe, giving us products that make sense, investing in the future. And that really is the job of the media at the moment.
And what are you telling companies that are like in the thick of it right now? Like, whether you're a pharmaceutical maker or you're Facebook, where you have lots of connectivity, lots of information sharing taking place on your platform. Are you telling those brands just like do your job and let your actions speak for themselves? Or are you advising brands like, no, get out there and make sure people know the role you're playing in crisis? Like, how do they thread that needle?
You have to go out and talk right now, because the presumption is that we're all in desperate shape. We have to calm people down. We have to say that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, that in fact, we have to do facts, compassion, and empathy. And those things need to come together. And we need to do it every day. We need to make sure that we give information to employees so that they can share it with their communities. We need to be sure that business is seen as a force for good. We've learned this lesson in 2008 when the banks were seen as evildoers, and it took them the better part of a decade to get back. And now we have a great chance, if you're in pharmaceutical or in technology in particular, and also food companies, to show your leadership. And I want to particularly call out Tyson, it's a client, for giving $60 million to frontline workers and truckers and others who are working overtime to make sure that food gets to people in America.
A question from a viewer in Seattle wondering, based on performance today, who do you think will emerge from this crisis with a lot more trust than they had going in?
I think the tech companies will, because they're enabling us to work from home. I think the food companies will continue to supply American supermarkets. And I think the pharma companies are going to have a big rebound in trust, because we will have both a vaccine and also medication that will deal with patients. I I think the industry that's the biggest question mark is banks, because, at some point they're going to have to determine credit worthiness, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on small businesses. So that one's really up in the air.
Richard Edelman, we appreciate your survey work. We appreciate you sharing it with the viewers, and we appreciate you appearing on the program. We're going to have a quick message from Anheuser-Busch. Then we'll return with Kim Hart, who's one of our smartest reporters at Axios. Unfortunately, the governor of Michigan has been sidetracked by news, and we'll get her on an upcoming program.
This buds for the Blues, the Reds, and the Warriors. This buds for the Giants, the Jazz, and the Magic. This buds for the home team.
Joining us now is Kim Hart, who is one of our best reporters. She worked for us when we ran Politico. She works for us now when we run Axios. I want to start by talking about leadership at home. You're a mother. You're one of our most valuable employees. You and I did a virtual coffee yesterday. We talked a lot just about how hard it is. You have young children, to balance that while also trying to be a leader inside the company. What tricks, what hacks have you found in the first 3 weeks of quarantine that might help other mothers who are watching this?
Oh, that's a great question. I think for most moms, and I talk to other friends, I get through the day by talking to other people and sharing tips or what their struggles are, and just venting sometimes, especially when you have young children, can go a long way. Taking it minute by minute and hour by hour sometimes. And also lowering the pressure on ourselves. I think today's moms, especially working moms, have an enormous amount of guilt on both sides and are trying to be perfect on everything that they do and every aspect of their life. And there's just no way to be able to do everything to the extent that you would under normal circumstances. And I think there's also a distinction to remember that this isn't just simply working from home. This is being at home during a crisis and trying to work and trying to do what's best for your family and trying to do what's best for your community. And to the extent that you can balance that, and not every day is easy to balance that, but that's the goal here. One of my other colleagues, Joanne Mueller, actually brought up that pacing yourself is important. This is very clearly turning out to be a marathon situation, not a sprint. And we all have to keep an eye on our own health as well, so that we can be there for our families and our communities and our workplace.
I agree with all that. But I think one of the pleasant developments of being quarantined and being remote is, I do feel like as a company, we share even more information, we share even more experiences, and we're able to connect a lot. One of the cool things that you've done is you've covered technology broadly. Now you spend a lot of time thinking about cities, usually in terms of connectivity and drones and autonomous vehicles and 5G. And now the only story for the American city is, when do you get hit by the virus? Like, when you're talking to mayors, like, how are they thinking about this? How are they preparing for it if they're not New York City, if they're not Detroit, if they're not New Orleans, if they're not Seattle or San Francisco, that are already in the middle of it?
I think the biggest thing here is that cities were not prepared at all for this. Of all of the crises that they have been thinking about, whether it be climate change or natural disasters or housing issues, a variety of things, a pandemic was never really something that was on their list. So they're trying to figure out not only how to keep their people safe, but also afloat economically. I think what I've heard from the mayors that I've been talking to is that they are, we were just talking about communication in our own company and within our own circle of friends and communities. It's even more important for them right now. They're relying on text message chains, on emails, on fairly regular conference calls, just to check in with city leaders of other cities that are of comparable size, or even bigger cities or smaller cities, to see what have they learned, what are their lessons, what have they done wrong, what would they have done differently. But it also comes down to how they're working directly with the state governors, or the state governments, particularly the governors as well. I think it's interesting that the governors are finding themselves sort of in the middle here. they're the middlemen between the federal government on one hand and getting a lot of pressure and trying to put pressure on the federal government themselves, but then also getting a lot of pressure and questions and the need for information, the need for resources and supplies from the cities themselves. And I think that cities have found that this has really been a lesson in resiliency and leadership for them, because they've had to step into the void very quickly with basically zero notice whatsoever, and step into roles that they never thought that they'd have to be in, which is basically leading in a national crisis.
Interesting as you say that, because I was thinking, we talk so much about how long will it take to recover the economy to recover, or how long will it take for people to go back to work. But then when hearing you talk, it's clear that we have postponed sort of the advancement of cities potentially years, right? The idea of like fixating on 5G or fixating on drones or fixating on driverless cars or connectivity just seems like something that'll be pushed off, because people are going to have to figure out, how do you prepare for the future? How do you prepare for future pandemics?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the experts that I've talked to a lot of urban planners and urban experts who've been thinking about this a lot in the past few days. And one of the things that they brought up is that cities have, in some cases, had their priorities a little bit backwards. They've been looking at, how do we become smart cities? How are we using technology to our advantage? How are we becoming more efficient? But they let some of the bigger discussions that could have really helped in this situation slide, or really weren't able to take action because of political gridlock on the ground and at the federal level. That includes affordable housing. I mean, we're seeing people who are struggling to pay rent, who are not sure when they're going to be able to pay their next rent check, or be able to survive and stay in their house without being evicted beyond certain eviction moratoriums that have been set. We're talking about paid sick leave. A number of states, a number of cities do not have, or not able to put in place paid sick leave policies, healthcare situations. So these are policies that are, not as sexy to talk about, and to maybe won't win elections with in the same way, or excite voters in the same way, but that have really been proving to be the core of what's been needed right now and what the major push is. When you talk about the future of cities, I think what we haven't seen yet, and what we haven't really explored, is the devastating impact on city budgets and state budgets that we're going to see. I think just last week, it was written by the LA Times that California had a $21 billion surplus that is probably going to be wiped out in a matter of months. Most cities and states after the 2008-2009 housing crisis did institute some sort of rainy day fund, but that is nothing compared to what it's going to take financially to get through this crisis. And you're dealing with two things at once. It's not just the costs of preparing, working with the healthcare workers and making sure people have food, just keeping the city going. It's also the lack of revenue. I mean, think about, if you're thinking about a place like Florida or from Orlando or Las Vegas, that is extremely dependent on tourism and visitors, and to have all of that grind to a halt in a matter of days, that's going to be devastating for years, if not a generation.
Kim Hart, we appreciate you joining us. We appreciate all that you do. To our viewers, hopefully we'll get the Michigan governor to join us on another live stream. We're trying to do these weekly. We encourage you to follow us on Twitter at #Axios. Read the site at Axios.com. We care a lot about helping people better understand all the different dimensions of this crisis. We try to be as fair, as clinical, as balanced, as humanly possible. So thank you very much. Thank you to the events team at Axios for putting this on. Thank you to my daughter who's sitting behind the camera, helping man this in quarantine. Stay healthy, stay safe, and we'll see you next week.